Welcome again to our third webinar in the Women's Lunch and Learn series. And we are celebrating Women's History Month this month. So hopefully you have been joining in on some of the past ones or have seen the replays. But today we are very, very excited to welcome our guest, Elise Martini. She has worked in the construction industry for over 40 years. After graduating from a pre-apprenticeship program, she was accepted into the Kansas City Cement Masons Apprenticeship in 1980. Elise has worked as a journey person on thousands of job sites. She earned the admiration and respect of her coworkers for being a hard worker and a team player. She began utilizing her knowledge and skills in the trades and obtained the position of apprenticeship coordinator in 1993 and business agent for the Cement Masons and Plasterers Local Union 518, located in 1999. Elise is on her sixth term as an officer in her local, serving as president for 4 and currently vice president. She also serves on the Health and Welfare Trust Fund and pension plans, and as a delegate for the Tri-County Labor Council, Kansas City Labor Council, the Missouri State Building and Trades, and a delegate for her local union at all state conferences and national conventions. In spring of 2006, Elise was hired by the Builders Association as the Workforce Development Manager and assisted contractor unions in recruiting the workforce for our industry. In 2012, she was encouraged to run for business manager, financial secretary for the Greater Kansas City Building and Construction Trades Council by both the Builders Association and several trade unions. Elise was elected in July of 2012 and is the first woman to hold that position. Elise has actively recruited women and minorities during her entire career. She currently serves on several community boards, including Kansas City, Missouri Construction Workforce Board, Kansas City Contract Fairness Board, Kansas Apprenticeship Council, Kansas Workforce Partnership Board, Greater Kansas City United Way Board, Truman Medical Center, and was appointed by Governor Kelly to serve on the first Sparks Task Force. Elise just completed her term on the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City Economic Advisory Council. When Elise isn't working, and obviously you can see she's involved in a lot of things, she loves music, she loves life and spending time with her family. So Elise, we have a small agenda here today. Basically what we're going to do is I'm going to let you talk and tell us all about your journey and some of the things that you're doing. Then we're going to have some questions for you. So we'll be ready for that. And then anyone who's listening in is also going to be asking some questions. So we'll make sure I get those out of the chat box. So I'm going to be navigating things here. But again, welcome. Welcome, Elise. We're so glad to have you.
I'm excited to be here, and great job on the bio. That I didn't realize I'd sent you a pretty lengthy bio. So you did a
lot of big words. So you're doing a lot of important things.
Well, I appreciate that. And I want to thank Swope Health. I want to thank you as well as Duran McGee and all of Swope Health. I think a lot of times we don't realize everything that you all do. And from something that I've not missed one yet, labor has helped a lot when you guys do a lot of your food pantries. We went through a pandemic, and thanks to Pat Jones Macklin, she gets labor all involved in some of the efforts that you guys do to assist the area. So we appreciate all you guys do and everything. It takes a community, right? It takes a village. So
definitely
honored to be here.
All right, so tell us about your journey.
Yeah, let me just kick things off. So I'm born and raised here in Kansas City. Grew up over at 49 and Bell in Kansas City, Missouri, and my grandparents, God love them, was very really wanted us to go to a Catholic school, wanted us to be religious. So I went to visitation, and about 6th or 7th grade, my folks bought some property out in Turner, out in Wyandotte County. And so right when I was going into my 8th grade year at visitation, which is your senior year and you're really special, we moved out to Wyandotte County, and I went to Turner High School. And it's weird because when I ended up going to Turner, my 5th grade algebra book at Visitation was my junior algebra book at Turner. So needless to say, I worked really hard at Visitation, but when I got to Turner, I kind of skated through some stuff. It was nice. I was really big on the drill team and did yearbook and stuff and a lot of social stuff because I kind of like to be active, and I'm, as you all will know, I'm more of an extrovert than an introvert. So when I came out of high school and graduated, the question was, what was I going to do? And I really liked working with other people. So I really thought, you know what, I want to get into psychology. So I went to KU, and at this time, I'm 18, never been away from home, right? KU's not far from home, but it's still away. Sorry for any you MU fans, but we are in the Sweet 16, just saying. So I went to KU, and you know what? I got up there and it was just not right for me. It was just the academics. I wasn't prepared. It didn't help that I was 18 and the drinking age in Kansas at that time was 18. It was just that lifestyle that I was not good about, really disciplining myself. So my mom and dad said, you know what, you need to come back, go to the community college. And they're right. Get your electives. I know you had Chancellor Beatty on. Those community colleges are so important to us because you can get your electives in, you can learn and figure out where you want to go. So I went out to, I came back, and I was getting ready to prepare to go to Wyandotte County Community College, KCK Community College. And I heard an advertisement on the radio. And back then, this is 1980. In 1980, our president was President Carter. And Jimmy Carter believed our job sites should look like the communities they're being built in. So he was really big on affirmative action. So he started really supporting affirmative action programs. And right now, if anyone's familiar with grants that we have to come to the city, we're on a WIOA grant, it's the Workforce Investment Opportunities Act. But before then, we had JTPA, Joint Training Partnership Act. Before that, I was a CETA girl. I was one of the very first grants to get more minorities and females in the construction industry. So by the grace of God, I applied for a pre-apprenticeship program with my local union and got accepted. Now, you talk about some challenges there. I'm a third generation concrete finisher. My dad is a concrete finisher, and his uncle was a concrete finisher, not in this area, but my dad was in this area. And my dad, we were building the KCI airport, the first one, in that day.
Wow.
And he was working on it, but actually he had worked on it before. We were doing all kinds of work at the time. We were doing the Arrowhead Stadium, 435 loop was being built. So much work was generating then as it is right now. And my dad had the firm believer that if this job was easy, they'd have women or kids doing it. And my dad said that constantly on the work because it was all men. It was male dominated field, and it was an older person, it wasn't. So when I applied for the training program, my dad called the apprenticeship coordinator and told him not to accept me.
Wow.
Yeah. And I told my dad, what makes you think I want to work for you anyway? And my dad went, well, you're not working for anybody else. Oh my gosh, it's brutal out there. So I was much more introverted back then as I am now, but my dad, I had that conversation with my dad after the apprenticeship coordinator called me and said, hey, I don't know, your dad's not supportive. I'm like, well, could I go to work for anybody else? He goes, oh yeah, you can be placed anywhere, and you won't ever work all the time for your father. But this, you're only 18. This is your dad's wishes. I was still under his roof at the time. I was living with, I was living with my parents, my mom and dad. And it was really trying, but I had that heart-to-heart conversation that, Dad, this is really what I want to do. I mean, I had no idea what I was going to get into. So he reconsidered, but he said, if you're going to get in here, you're going to work. I want you to come work for me. I want you to work, to learn the right way. So my very first year was 1980. And anybody that's familiar with this area, they were building the Adams Mark Hotel, which is catty corner for the stadiums. And that was one year that we had the hottest July that we had in the history. It was in July, literally, and I started June 9th, but there were months, and literally, I think it was really June, we had 15 days that were above 105. Some of the days were 115-degree days. And those of you that don't know about concrete generates heat, right? It's a pourable, flowable product. And they're not cement trucks, they're concrete trucks. That's not cement. Cement's a portion of concrete. That's one pet peeve we had. So the concrete truck comes in and it pours, and then through hydration, the water evaporation, if it's colder, it takes longer to set up, meaning harden. When it's hot, it sets up faster. And we call it, when it gets too hot so fast, it blows up, meaning you can't get a finish on it. So I'll never forget, I'm out on this slab, this poor 90-pound 18-year-old wondering, Lord, what have I done? But it's all about support and mentorship. And I had a guy, first thing he said, throw that mag out of here. You're not gonna be able, because the mag is what you finish when it's wet. And he took me aside. I'll never forget him. And he actually was a firefighter hero colonel. And these guys actually pulled me aside and showed me what to do. And it was a challenge. I mean, it's still somewhat a challenge in what I do, but it just made things the way I was. So I completed the 3-year apprenticeship program and then became a journey person, and really started getting more involved then with my local union. And that's where, it's really hard. Back then, they always said it was bad luck to have 2 women on the same job. So there'd be other women that you would come across, but never on the same job. And if you did run across one, like a different trade, it was like we couldn't stop and talk to each other. The guys would stop and talk to us all day. But if 2 girls were talking to each other, it's like, get to work, or what are you doing? So there were some challenges there, but a lot of it was just to get to know the trade. And a lot of times when you're an apprentice, I don't want to call it hazing, but there's a little bit of a, ribbing going on, where they're kind of teasing you, and they tell you to go get a board stretcher where there's no such thing, or, go get these kind of tools. But it really wasn't because I was a female. It was more about, just trying to giving them a laugh and letting them know that I'm still an apprentice, right? So that's kind of how I got my start.
Wow. So I can imagine those conversations with your dad. At any time, did you just feel like he didn't believe in you, or that he just didn't want his daughter to participate in this kind of work?
He just did not want his daughter to participate in this kind of work because of the mentality of some of the guys back in 1980, completely different now. But I'll tell you, the support of my mom. I always said I've got my dad's ability, my mom's brains, because my mom was behind the scenes. I mean, even when I was little, and I wanted to go stay the night somewhere, and Dad would say no, and now my mom would go, wait till he goes to bed and then sneak out, and he'll know. He leaves at 5 a.m, he'll never know. And 9 times out of 10, I got away with it. And that one time I'd get caught, I'd be crying, and my mom would go, why are you crying? I'm like, well, because I married Dad. She goes, was it worth it? What do you mean? Well, did you have fun? I said, yeah. Well, don't worry about it. You only got caught once. She was made it aware that as long as someone knew where I was at all time, and I had their respect, once in a while, your dad's can be a curmudgeon and your mom can be, that supportive. So, I kind of was always like that. But the thing that really changed things with my dad is, man, I learned the strongest work ethic. And that is what's really a value to those listening, is you've got to have that work ethic that folks, it is so tough in today's time, especially with some of the generations that don't understand the value of, you've got to work hard to get paid the right amount, and you've got to earn, to be successful. You got to work, and you got to really work hard. So I learned to work hard. I mean, literally, when everybody was always working and we'd all stop and get a sandwich, it's like, yeah, you take a break, but you go right back to work. I brought my lunch because I didn't have time to go get a sandwich sometimes, because it's concrete. So you don't get a break. You get a break when concrete gives you a break. So you learn a really strong work ethic, and my dad taught me that. I also think I learned a really, I'm a really good mechanic. A mechanic means you're a very good craftsman. And I think I'm a really good, and my local tells me this too, I'm a really good craftsman, but it's because you earn that right way. And there is some stipulation when you're the only girl. It's like, oh my gosh, what's she there for? Hey, go get me a cup of coffee. It's like, I'm not here to get your coffee, So you got to kind of work through some of that. But on the other hand, you want to get respect from them and some others. But on the other hand, when they're asking you to get a board structure, and they're not making fun of you. They're actually just, it's kind of fun to go along with them. And that, to me, these jobs are so hard that let's try and have a little bit of fun while we're doing them. So
exactly. I can't imagine being out there in the heat.
No, or the cold.
Concrete. Wow. Yeah. That's amazing. So was there any time during those beginning years that you just said, hey, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I just need to do something else?
You would think so. And there was one year in 1983 where, you get it's rained all week this week for, those that are actually on today.
Mhm.
And man, there was one in 83 that I worked 4 days in July. I mean, that's why people understand the importance of unemployment and the importance that we have, because, with us being seasonal, if you get a bunch of snow or a tough winter, or right now in Missouri, we get 20 weeks of unemployment. They're trying to reduce that to 8 weeks. When you go through a pandemic, like our folks right now, or you're going through like seasonal changes where you get, 2 weeks of moisture, you've already got, 1/4 of your unemployment gone. So it's really important folks understand the reasonings that we have, and why it's so important to have the infrastructure we had to help folks during a pandemic. So there has been some challenges. I know, one thing about construction and with us is I'm a union person, as you know from my bio. And so I worked out of my union hall. And when it gets slow, you work out of your hall. So I would go to work out of my hall, and being the female on the job, it was really odd, because they're like, oh, I'll never forget, I went to, well, and then if you get called out of the hall, you're not going to work at 6 or 7 in the morning. Generally, they find out 2 guys or girls didn't show up, they're short on help. So they're like, hey, call the hall. So then I'll go out. I'll never forget, I was working at 100 College Boulevard in Monroe. They were putting in some sort of medical facility, and I get up on the second floor, climb up there, and I've got all my stuff. And I had been in a couple of years now. I'm now a journey person, so I kind of got to be a little bit more of a smart aleck person. So I get up on the top of the thing, and they're all looking at you because it's 9 o'clock, banker's hours, and the guy says, oh, banker's hours. I said, yeah, I know, I just got a call from the hall. And he says, okay, well, fill out this form. And I said, oh, great, you're gonna pay me? He goes, well, if you're any good. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll work till noon, and if you don't think I'm good enough, then you send me home and we'll call it even. But if you keep me past noon, we'll call it a day. Now, what some of you all don't know is I actually have a sister in the trade too. And so my sister had also worked. So when I fill out the paperwork, he goes, oh, you're one of those martini girls. And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, we're going to pay you. And I'm like, okay, it's fine, but it's a reputation, but you don't know. And a lot of times it's really tough, because the main thing, especially in any industry, is the pioneers that went first. Mm-hmm. And if that pioneer was successful and really did a good job, then they're going to want another Janice or another Lise, or with a minority structure, whether Latino or whether African-American, they're going to want another, because that first person, that first guy that came through, Gerard, who came through, who did a good job, or Duran, oh my gosh, it's like, yeah, do you have any friends? Do you have other folks at work? But if that first pioneer, and that's where I have the hardest conversation, because as you said in my bio, I became an apprenticeship coordinator. And I'm all about putting more minorities and females to work. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But part of the conversation was, one of the guys, I became an apprenticeship coordinator, first female apprenticeship coordinator, really was big about getting minorities and females. We had about a 35% minority ratio and really about a 20% female in my program when I ran it. But when they see folks that look like them, they know they're accepted and they're going to want to be part of it. So, I was talking to one of the apprenticeship coordinators. I'm like, so what are you doing to recruit women? Oh, we had a woman once. And I'm like, you had one woman once? Okay. I said, well, what happened if she had a problem? Or what happened? He said, well, she just didn't make it out. I go, well, she probably had some problems. I said, Bob, what? And there's his name. How did you take care of that? Well, she could have come to me. And I'm like, we don't want to come to you with some of our problems. I mean, I understand that, but I mean, there's certain things that you got to feel comfortable, especially when it's a huge problem. So it's really important that folks understand the dynamics. And thank goodness, not just from President Carter that believes in affirmative action, but City of Kansas City, Missouri has workforce goals. And those goals are 2% female and 10% minority. So our projects that we're working on, those contractors have a goal that if there's any funding with the City of Kansas, Missouri, those are goals. That's the only city in our whole metropolitan area that has that. And kudos to way before Mayor Lucas, but everybody is looking at those goals, because that's how we get a more diverse workforce. That's how it's so important to bring that up. So that's one of the things that I kind of like to always, talk about, is some of the challenges I had when I first got started. think we all see challenges through our whole lives. It weird, but every time I went to a new employer, it's just like when I went out to the hall, that one person, unless they really knew me, you've got to start all over on earning the respect and earning them. And it really, it's tough, but it's unfortunate, but you've got to constantly earn your respect because you're the minority. You're not the majority where they already, they don't think of it. It's like you stand out and you've got a target on your back. So you've got to earn that respect.
Well, it sounds like the one thing that has really stood out in your career is your willingness to work hard, because you knew the work was going to be hard. So you say your sister is in the trade as well. What was it, you that inspired her to do it, or how did that happen?
She actually inspired me, just amazingly. And it's weird because once she got me inspired, she actually, as you know, when you meet somebody, you travel. She ended up moving up to Seattle and worked out of Seattle's local, which she had it very, she's got some stories too, but she worked her way up and worked her way. Yeah. So my sister and me, and my Facebook page has me and my sister actually working together we actually did Central High School. We actually helped build Central High School long ago. And yeah, and that's what's neat, because you can go, wow, I built that. I mean, those folks working at that airport, it's so cool that they're going to be able to say, man, I helped build that airport,
Wow. So you can go around the city and see all the projects that you worked on. How many is it? Do you have any idea?
I really I couldn't even fathom. And it's a whole different sector now, because now I'm not physically working on them, but I'll use, we talk about challenges and moving from my role as apprenticeship to the local union, and then going back out in the field. Because the one thing about you working in construction or anywhere, you can always take that skill craft anywhere. So I can go to work in Vegas, I can go to work in Seattle, I can go to work for another contractor, or you can so I went back to work with my tools. I was working at ITAM, and that's when the Builders Association said, we need your input, we need your focus. So they actually created a position for me for workforce coordinator to help recruit minorities and females in the industry. And that's where I was encouraged to run for this, because at that time, the building and trades, and those that don't know labor, let's start with it. So the umbrella of all of labor is the AFL-CIO. Okay. And that is Liz Schuler is now the head of the AFL-CIO. We got a woman as the head of the AFL-CIO, and then they have councils around it. And in Kansas City, we had the Greater Kansas City AFL-CIO. So that's Pat Duke Diakovich, goes by Duke, and Becky Capper, who is right-handed, does everything. They oversee all the trades. But underneath that, North America Building Trades Union, NAP2, is kind of like the umbrella over all the construction unions, and they have councils too. And all of these positions are elected. So I was working for the Builders Association, and the gentleman that had my job probably didn't have a strong work ethic, because he just was losing, because we focus on affiliates. So our AFT, our American Federation of Teachers, are affiliated with the AFL-CIO. The postal workers are affiliated, the firefighters, the police. For the building and trades, it's the construction trades. So it's the operating engineer, it's the labor, it's the roofer, it's the cement mason, it's the iron worker. They're all affiliated with me. They're also, hopefully, most of them are also affiliated with Duke. They all are. But we actually build the city. So I have to work. When it came up, the gentleman wasn't doing a very good job. I was working for the builders, and it's funny because we have quarterly meetings with your bosses. And I said, hey, I just want everybody to know there's a rumor out there that I'm being vetted to run against this guy for the Kansas City Building Trades. And my boss said, well, are you interested? Well, Janice, you never tell your boss you're interested in another job. I said, oh, no. And he says, well, if you were interested, we'd support you. And I'm like, really? He says, yeah. He said, the construction labor is so dysfunctional right now, we would support you. So I'm like, so what do you think? So I was so at that time, I talked to a couple of the trades, and they're like, we will re-affiliate, because he didn't have the trades involved. We'll re-affiliate if you get elected. And so I did have to leave that job, because you don't want to, so I left, but he held the job open for me through the month of July. The election was in July, because he said, if you don't win, you can come back here in August, which I love. I mean, that's why labor management, it's so important that everybody works together. It's not just labor, it's the municipalities. It's how well the Kansas City, Missouri City Council works with labor. It's how well the Jackson County Legislature works with labor. When you have relationships, so we're not always going to agree, but when you have relationships. So you'd kind of do the math. There were 52 delegates at that time. So I knew I needed 26, and I had done the math, and I knew I had about 30. And so when we had the election, it was, there were 52, it was 44-4. Not everybody voted. So yeah, he was a little overwhelmed. But what happened was I had to deal with a little bit of, as much as I thought it would take me 6 months to get things back. Gary Kemp was the business manager before him, and Gary had done an unbelievable job on working with everybody. But then it just takes one, one person that doesn't see eye to eye with everybody that really can drive things down real quick. As you've seen, like what we've done with some of our leaders. And so it took me, well, between it took me about a year to get things moving in the right direction. But I'm so lucky that I've got the support. I mean, I knew Duke coming on board. Duke was already there with the AFL-CIO and Becky and on all those folks. So from that's where we got kind of working together and trying to get everybody solidarity, everybody together, and then working on trying to get labor agreements in the Kansas City area. So as much as I said our industry needs to look like the communities that we work in, we also need to look at ways that we can have more labor participation, because just because it comes to the city of Kansas, Missouri, doesn't mean it had prevailing wage. Now it does, but we've worked on ensuring that prevailing wage is on all projects that touches the Kansas City, Missouri, touches the city of Kansas, Missouri, or independence. It's law in Missouri, but that didn't mean the statutory agencies were abiding by that. And so you're not bidding apples to apples. So we weren't really having the market share we have. And then the streetcar came, and we were able to get a lot of stuff done with the streetcar. And then probably the biggest challenge I've had since this job, which I'm on my third term, they're 4-year terms, was the KCI airport. The KCI airport was an unbelievable challenge because we wanted it to be a project where the folks that worked out there had a security of organized labor, which means they're all going to make the same wage. They're all going to get benefits, health and welfare, pensions. I mean, there's a great reason to have SWOPE, and there's a great reason to have university health, but why should we burden those not-for-profit systems when we, we should be able to, the contractors working on those projects are getting paid an ample amount. They should be able to provide health insurance and pension for their employees. So we spent 18 months negotiating a contract for the airport. And part of that contract was actually having a workforce training program, WTP. And so part of that came in that contract was recruiting folks from targeted areas, minorities, females, veterans, incarcerated, folks that maybe made a bad decision in life but came back. And so with that, we started a program. We have graduated our 10th class, I think 3 weeks ago, and we've got about 200 folks working up at the airport. Now, I mentioned goals, and the goals for the city are 2% and 10. With the airport, we wanted stronger goals. So we negotiated 2.7 and 20%. Now, don't get me started on a 2.7, because I don't know what a 0.7 female looks like. But with that, we have over exceeded the 20% minority goals, not double them, but we're about 22 or 23%. And we've had doubles. We're over 7% females working out at that airport. So that's what the win-win is. When you see, you've got to lift up the village. You've got to all work together. And that's where the passion and the belief is taking care of, everybody's important, and understanding, although we might all put our pants on the same way, it doesn't mean that what we all went through last night was the same thing, or doesn't mean that I didn't have poverty, or you know what I mean? No, I'm going to the Dollar Tree to buy everything I can because I can only afford. It's really tough, and I think it's worse now after the pandemic. So
wow. So let's go back and talk about, it's very obvious that you have been a voice and an advocate for minorities and females. So let's go back to when you were first working in the field and you hardly saw any females, and then you saw one. What were the types of conversations or the mentoring activities that you engaged in to help bring the next woman up?
So it's funny because there's a two-way street on that, because you go up and you embrace them. Hey, it's good to get to know you. I mean, we've actually started a mentorship program in Kansas City called Heartland Women of the Trades. So you have had a woman to talk to, but a lot of times back in those days, oh my gosh, you almost thought you were pinned against each other. You know what I mean? Where when you go up and talk to them, it's like, oh wait, you know, there's only so much spots for one woman. I don't want to talk to her because I don't want her, you know, coming after my job. And that's what's so sad. And that's the same thing with the minority community. You know, unfortunately we have to have these goals and quotas. I mean, really, I'm glad we
Right.
have them because it does instill it, but it's unfortunate you have to have them, right?
Right.
Why don't we have 30 or 40%? Why do we have to have a 2.7 goal for female? But so at first there weren't a lot. And so whenever you see them, it would be great because it's like, you know, it's like an alien over there.
Right.
And then it started getting a little bit more active because of some of the programs that were out there. But you're right. Then it kind of got to be more challenged because folks almost felt defensive, you know, that come in. But it's really about how each local looks at it. Some of the local unions that have really strong females, it's because the pioneers did well and they moved them up. Like I got on my e-board. I've been a health and welfare trustee for almost 40 years. I've actually been in the trade for 43. I've been a health and welfare trustee for about 38. But for my local to understand, and it was corny, but back then the guy just thought it'd be good to have a woman on a health and welfare fund because a lot of times the wives knew more about, you know, your insurance than the guy did, right? But you kind of work your way up. And so a lot of it was the locals inspiring to say, hey, I want diversity. I want diversity around my council. And that's the one thing the AFL-CIO also does a good job about, making sure there's diversity, you know what I mean, around the council. You want to make sure, you know, and I think a lot of folks, not just in construction, but you have a board at Swope, you know, you have different ways all over. And I'll use the United Way board. United Way is really important that they look at all areas, all sectors, and making sure that it's all the community. So there's diversity, it's everything. It's hard to do, but it's really important. So yeah, when I first got started, we embraced each other, but sometimes there were a few that didn't quite embrace us because they almost felt like it was a competition. You know what I mean? That they were worried about keeping their job. So.
And you also talked about just some of the things that happened on the job in the early days where men, I mean, they didn't treat you necessarily. Do you feel like they didn't necessarily treat you any different? You know, you talked about the jokes they would play, but that was kind of the initiation into the field. So were you feeling at all challenged being in a male-dominated field by the workers who were working alongside of you?
Janice, I still feel challenged working in
Really? Yeah.
I had 2 meetings this morning and I was the only female there. Now, several of the trades have looked at and actually have hired women representatives and I give them, but on the other hand, it's got to be an earned, deserving position, right? It's not, we're not trying to fill a quota, and I'm not saying that, but so I understand that being the only woman at the table, but man, I love it when I'm in a group. I've got pre-jobs up at the airport where I've got a couple different women. We had one yesterday and there's a couple other women in there, and it's like, but you got to support. And I think now more than ever, we understand how important it is to support each other. You know, whether it's, you know, whether it's the Me Too or whatever, or Black Lives Matter, or whatever the media is looking at, we got to support each other. And it's so nice that it's not just women supporting women. You see the men there too. It's not just the African-American community supporting Black Lives Matter. It's all of us. And some of these knuckleheads are never going to get it through their head, but as the generations grow older and we bring up, you know, the value in some others, it will get better. So it's still a really challenge as far as working in a male dominated field. I still struggle. It's not as bad as it was. And I think a lot of it, the very first time in my life that I thought that I did not have to start all over again earning respect was when I went to the Builders Association to this job. Anytime I ever went anywhere else, I always felt like I had to start all over. Because the folks didn't know you. I think when I finally was at the Builders and came to hear from all the different facets that I worked, and maybe it was I'd been around a little bit longer, you know what I mean, where I was in my 40s and not my 20s or my 30s. But it really, I think that's one of the ones that our younger generation doesn't understand, that, you know what I mean, sometimes you really have to, it takes years to actually work your way up to a level where you know what I mean, where you're respected and they understand it. You know, it's not something, and you can make one mistake and lose it quickly too.
Wow. So if you were mentoring a young woman who is interested in the construction area, what would be some of the things that you would tell her to encourage her along this journey?
So first, look at everything that's in front of you, because this is your life. Right? This is what you want to do, and nobody should have any control of that but you. right? I mean, we all cross, and when we all come to that fork in the road, that's our path of whether we want to go right or left. And that's where you want to have that mentorship or someone to talk to. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that they're giving you that support you need, but you also realize that it's your life. And so one of the things that, believe it or not, and my mom and dad have both been gone now. My dad's been passed for 12 years. If I had to do it all over again, I don't know if I'd be a concrete finisher. It's hard. It's hard. I could be an electrician. There's so many, and we're not the highest paying, and not that you always go where the money's at, but you know, you look at a pipe fitter, a plumber, a sheet metal worker, an IBW, all of them make about 47 bucks an hour. That's just on the check. And then besides that, with their benefit package, they're more like at 80 or 90. So I don't know if I'd had to do it all over again. I knew everything. I probably would have looked at all the different trades instead of just following my dad's footsteps. But maybe I wouldn't have been successful because my dad really taught me about, you know, really being a good mechanic and having that strong work ethic. I was always the first one to there at work every day. Sometimes it was just to find a place to park. And then you were always the last, I was always the last one to go home. But you know, you want to, you know, you don't know what you're getting into every day. In construction, you don't. So you can't control anything. So you want to do everything you can for safety and stuff. So yeah, that's women. There are so many opportunities out there, and especially now. I mean, there is still, we've got another year for that airport. The Missouri AFL-CIO, Rudy Chavez, we've actually started a pre-apprenticeship program for the Missouri AFL-CIO that we're looking at bringing more folks in. And so anybody that's interested in that, I can put my information in the chat, or I know if they got a hold of you or Duran, they will let me know, but we're recruiting for that program right now.
Okay.
We're actually, I don't know if this is, well, it's public because it came to the city where we met with the mayor and city manager yesterday. We want to take the program that we have out at the airport and we want to bring it to Kansas City. We want to be able to, when you've got a project with a threshold of whatever, say, you know what, why aren't we helping add more folks into that program? So met with the city manager yesterday. Granted, we've got about 6 months to try and put something together and figure out funding, but why should someone, you know what I mean, that lives in the downtown or the inner city have to drive clear out the airport, you know what I mean, to meet a quota or goal? Why can't there be those programs like the streetcar that is going to ripple out so much, you know what I mean, between Union Station and it gets over to UMKC, there's going to be work all over that. And then, you know, they had the announcement this morning for the new Velvet. That is, I don't know, we've talked about projects like the airport, but we've got the airport's the biggest project we've ever had in Kansas City. We have this Velvet project that's coming up with Diode. That's 5.5 billion. The airport is 5.5. It is a project where it's going to have about 10 years worth of work at least, with 700 to 800 folks working on that project all year long. Why we need that, where we've got opportunities for folks that live in the Northland to go to work there, you know, and have those incentives that contractor know those incentives to go to work. So that's kind of the stuff that I'm working on now, that continues that mentorship, continues more women coming in, continues more minorities coming in and putting folks to work, right?
Yeah, definitely. Now we had somebody that came in the chat box. Patricia Jones Macklin says, thanks for the shout out.
I love Pat. Gotta take care of her.
And so again, you talked about some of the programs, some of the training programs, about how can we recruit more women into this field?
Well, and that's the whole point. And all the trades get it. And really, we're all now more than ever, because we're not, the construction industry is not just competing with the construction industry. We're competing with Amazon. We're competing with all these that are paying 18, 19, 20 bucks an hour. And thank goodness. And when I say prevailing wage is just a minimum wage for construction. When you have a minimum wage in retail or a restaurant and all that, prevailing wage is the minimum wage that they have to pay you in construction. So get involved. We actually have a great website. It's beunion.com. That's BEYOUNION. So the U in you and the U in union are one. And so that's beunion.com. And that's got all the different trades on it. And they can look and research what trade, and then they can actually click there and let us know what trade they're interested in. And with that, then we'll get that information to the apprenticeship programs, but we'll also send it to Rudy with the Missouri AFL-CIO, because that's an excellent opportunity for them to get into that pre-apprenticeship program, which, you know what I mean, it's a 6-week program, but when they graduate that, they're going to have the skill level to go right into the trades, which we've got more work coming up in the next 3 years than we've ever had in our life. It's so amazing, all the work.
Wow, wow. So when you talk about the apprenticeship programs, are there things currently going on at the high school level or anything to help encourage young girls to enter the field?
Yeah, there is. There's a couple different things. So one we do is it's called Camp Nawick. And we do this with the high school girls, and it's done once a year. It's always done the first full week in June. And it's a camp where we teach women about the different parts of trade so they learn. I'd love to do it for adults because I really think I would like to know how to wire a lamp just as much as a kid would, right? So we have all the different trades. So the first day they may do, they'll do operating engineers. They'll learn about the cement masons program. They'll pour some concrete. They'll learn about laborers. Literally, they'll run a little jackhammer, not a little jackhammer, but the laborers will have them running a jackhammer and learning some different stuff. Operating engineers have them run equipment. The second day is ironworker day, where they actually weld all day and they learn to cut and weld. People don't realize that a lot of folks think ironworker that you're welding, but you also got to be able to cut and burn through things, like burn those holes in the steel to put bolts in. The third day is normally the carpenter day, where they learn all about the carpenters and they actually build something, whether it's a toolbox or a bench. The fourth day, it kind of wraps up where they do like the painter and electrician, so they paint their projects. Then they learn about electrical as well as pipe fitting and plumbing. And then the last day, we toured a project and we have their graduation. So that's every year. That's up to 25 women, young ladies that want to get into it. The other thing that we also do is that we do once a year, there's a thing called iBuilt, and it's it's at Bartle Hall this year. It's actually the week after next. And we recruit all the different high schools to come in, and the trades all have booths here, hands-on, right? Nobody wants to just come here and, or here's a flyer, or here's a brochure. But they come in and they do hands-on. So they'll run a piece of equipment. They'll learn how to glaze a window by the glaziers, which is glass. They'll learn the different things. So, and then we go to career fairs all the time. Turner had a career fair this week that we were at. Manual Tech is a great program. So we have a great relationship there. So we'll go out there and talk to Manual. We're always recruiting, and we really do start with the high school programs, but a lot of times it's important to have that like mentorship program, like that camp, where they see what exactly is going to get involved, and they kind of see, electrician, if you do it right and safety, it's not going to kill you, right? I mean, a lot of folks are scared to death of stuff. Well, if you do it right and you understand the safety, it's not so, it's a lot, it's not as hard as someone might think.
Okay, so you have these programs. It sounds like I just can imagine a young girl who thinks that this isn't a possibility for her to actually attend those programs and learn all those skill sets for things that perhaps she didn't think she could do, and what a difference it would make in her life and her career. Wow, that's wonderful. I'm sure that's a great feeling to go to those camps and see those girls learning, and it's probably amazing.
You know what? And it's as I started off, this is about you. And as much as you go through path, and as I tell them, if you're not comfortable doing something, tell us. We don't want you doing anything. And I'm going to tell you, and so, we'll ask how many girls have ever welded, how many girls have ever burned. And if they've done that, then we might put them into burning first. Because if you've never burned and then weld, because when you're welding, you're kind of doing a stick, but when you burn, you actually have a torch with fire on it. And literally, we have to have a plan B that day, because we'll have ladies that are like, I'm scared to death of it, I can't do it. It's like, okay, we're going to come over here and wreck the concrete we just poured yesterday, and we're going to work on some other stuff, just because you got to adapt. I mean, life is so short. I mean, I look at that poor tornado that hit. I don't know, there's a tornado that hit up north of us, and that actually was a fourth-year pipe fitter apprentice that it killed him, and it killed his two kids, and his wife was the only one that lived, and she also lost her mother. And life is so short. You don't know. So let's all try and work together with each other and try and do the best we can, because that's what it's all about, is working with each other, right? And if you need a hand, ask for it.
Exactly.
And guess what? That person might tell you no, but then ask somebody else. I mean, I'll never forget people say, oh, nobody will tell you no. Oh, people tell me no all kinds of time. But you know what? You just got to find the right person. That's the one thing about a mentor. Folks will ask you, can you help me be a mentor? And that's good, but there's a lot of other women besides me. That's where we started Heartland Women in the Trades. And we meet the last Monday of the month. Actually, we meet this Sunday, and it's for women in the trades, but it's also for women wanting to get in the trades. Because who better to support than someone that says, hey, I want to get in the trades, or I want my daughter to get in the trade, or I want my niece, or I want my sister, or my mom. And so we kind of pair them up with folks. And we also kind of know what jobs and projects are coming up. So, hey, I mean, painting comes up the tail in the project, right? The excavation, the carpentry is kind of sometimes at the very beginning. So it's finding out where there's opportunities and getting them started that way too. So that's where it's fun.
So who was your mentor?
Well, I want to say my mom was a very big mentor of mine, because my mom was just really made me feel like I can do anything. And I've had a lot of women that I've been around a lot. When I look at like Gina Walsh, Senator Walsh was a very big mentor when I got this job. She was actually with the Missouri AFL-CIO, or Missouri Building Trades. So you have that, and a lot of them are men. I mean, my business manager, I mean, literally, when I went out on a job site, and I was actually working at Johnson County Community College one of my very first days, and I was working on a curb, and the chute came over me and literally just poured concrete all over my head. Oh. So I go to the hose in the back of the truck, and I just hose it all up. And there was this old guy, Paul Mann, God rest his soul, that saw this 90-pound little girl go trying to hose her head off. And and he just laughed, and he's like, come over here. And I'm like, what? Let me help you through this. You know what I mean? You find folks that'll help you. And that's what we're talking about with this Kansas City, Missouri program that we're trying to develop, is we got to have mentors. Now we want to have like a retention coordinator, like we have at the airport. So if we've had this at the airport, where literally the gentleman got evicted the day before he was supposed to start working at the airport, the night before. You got to have that triage, because the person on that job site, hey, I'm only worried about pouring concrete. So there's got to be a retention coordinator built in that is not. But on the other hand, you've got to have that mentorship on the job site, and you've got to have those folks that are willing to help them, because it's really important. That first day, you don't know where you're going to park. You don't know where you're going to go. I mean, it's a job site. It doesn't say park here. You're going in the dirt. So it's really important that you have mentorship. And I've had a ton. I've got to say, Milton Warner, who was my business manager, who passed away last year from COVID, he really got me started into running for office. He would say, hey, you gonna go to the union meeting tonight? And I'm like, I don't know, I'll pick you up. So he'd pick me up and we'd go. And then you get there and they're like, hey, you working tomorrow? Nope. You want to work tomorrow? I'm like, sure, come on over here. I mean, you'd go to the union hall, and that night go to union meetings. From there, Milton Warner was the one that says, hey, you should run for e-board. Do you really think I got a chance, Milton? Oh, sure. And it's weird, because the night I ran for e-board, the job I was working on and I was on a small crew, we all had to work late. So none of them got a chance to come in and vote. It was everybody else. Yeah, I'm like, I'm not going to win this, but it's me going to the meetings, me respecting everyone, right? It's not, you know what I mean? And talking to everyone and saying, what would you like to see the local do? Reaching out and saying, I want to help you with this. I ask you for your vote as I try and help you with this. And so my mentor was a lot of the tribal elders long ago that came up through the ranks and just, infused in me to continue to work and stay busy. Yeah. And hopefully I've been a mentor to some other folks too, right? You got to pay it forward.
Right. And it sounds like you have done a great job of doing that. So it looks like we have a few more minutes, but I'm going to see if there's anybody that has any questions. But you talked about what you've been able to achieve with the airport project by raising the percentages of both minorities and women. What's your vision for where this goes in the future? What's your vision?
So my vision is to get female goals higher than 2.7%. Absolutely. I mean, and I think as we showed that those goals can be met, because a lot of times they're goals, so folks think that they can't be achievable, and so they stick with that. It's also growing. Okay. So I have grown from apprentice all the way to being the business manager at the building and trades. And maybe it's not in a union, but maybe you want to start your own business. Maybe you want to have that support. I mean, you look at we use acronyms, MBE and WBE, which is Women Business Enterprise and Minority Business Enterprise. Okay. There are so many opportunities in the Kansas City area that and there are goals for that too, on not just in construction, but throughout the city. The city needs to hire so much a percentage of whether you're a printer or whether you're a caterer or whatever, but knowing that you can do this and asking for support and asking for help and finding someone to say, hey, you do this so well. Can you help me do that? I want to see a project at the airport everywhere. when I am the first one when I'm going across the bridge or I'm going across some sort of program, I'm counting. And granted, you don't know. I mean, you're like today it's pretty cold, so you got heavy coats on and you got hats and hoods and hard hats. So you don't necessarily know if they're a female, or you don't necessarily know just because they have a dark tan whether they're a minority. But boy, I sure do guess. I sure do count. You know what I mean? Because it starts with leadership. It starts at the top. You know, it's a lot. You're a lot better. I'm a lot better voice where I'm at now, talking to the mayor and talking to CWC about what the goals should be out there at airport and how we're going to meet those goals with a new training program, than being, you know, the little squeaky wheel that's, you know, on the job for the first time and saying, I don't want to be all by myself. Can I have can I have someone else that looks like me? That's the color of my skin, or that's my same gender,
Right.
So I think it's really important that from us as leaders that we start at the top, and that's what I want to see. As much as I've been here 44 years and I'm starting to see folks starting to retire, I'm not done. I'm not done at all. We've got a Jackson County Detention Center coming up. I want to make sure we have some sort of program there to recruit. I mean, that is right in the heart of the city. That's off of I-70 and 40 highway. And I want our community to work on the detention center, not in the detention center. I want them, so why not? So we're working on trying to do a workforce training program there with the contract that gets selected for that. Working with the city, brand new, trying to get a program there. And continuing that camp. Wouldn't it be great instead of having that girls camp for high school girls? I bet most of the women on this call would love to be at that camp for a week. I'd love to learn how to wire that electrical. I got one light that does not work in my bathroom. I'd love to know how to fix that, right?
Totally. Yeah. I would love to learn a few of those things. Wow. This has been such a rich conversation. Let's see. There's a question here. Why do you think there is such a disparity with hiring minority construction workers? The comment is, my grandfather was a brick mason and concrete worker, and this was something he didn't want any of us doing, even though it was a good trade.
Well, just like my dad, right? My dad was the same way, and I'm sure he was probably the age of their grandfather. And back then, it was a totally different mentality. A lot of times is they don't want us working that hard because it's such hard work, but the wages back then aren't the wages now. I mean, when Amazon's paying 18, why wouldn't you want, and you're on your feet all day on Amazon, and
right.
And they don't air condition those big facilities. Why wouldn't you want to work a little harder and get a better wage? The other issue, and I'm when they ask this question, I think it's just that mindset mentality of that generation. Okay. I really think it's changed now, but I do think part of the problem we also have is I'm needing, it's spring. We're ready to put some people to work. It is a lot easier for Bob and Jim to ask Steve and Bill, hey, anybody else wants to get into construction because we're not hiring? Well, guess what? All those guys don't look like me or you. Those are those non-minority males. And we need to look outside the box, and we need to look at recruiting and not looking at our buddies or our friends or our neighbor, right? Because chances are they all look like you, but that's not how we get to a diverse workforce. And hey, I'm at fault. I mean, I have a lot of, I'm up to now 60 delegates. There is less than a handful, well, not a handful, meaning two hands, that are minorities. I do have, I think, 6 females that are now my delegates, but that is few and far between than 12 years. I mean, that's better than 12 years ago, but we got a long ways to go, because that's not right. Right. We're lucky. I mean, I've given my shout out to Duke. Reggie Thomas, who's the number 2 guy with the AFL-CIO here in Kansas City. He's a minority male and has done an excellent job working for his local and getting it to where it's going. You know what I mean? A person of color. And when that person at the top is a person of color, he's got, folks underneath him. Operators just hired a female, so they finally got a female as a business rep. And it's also about the Hispanic. I mean, there's a lot of Latinos coming into trades. We should be looking at having Latinos on our boards and on the union boards. And there are about 3 or 4 that do, just like there are about, the City Masons I'm real proud of, because we actually have on our executive board, we have another female. We actually have 2 minorities, actually 3 minorities, because I've got a Latino. So, I mean, there's, but you've got to look at that. And I think basic trades is a little bit easier. Like when like they're saying their grandfather was a brick mason or a concrete,
Mhm.
that's a basic trade. And especially now, that's a huge trade where we've got a lot of Latino populations getting into. But it's just
Mhm.
kind of looking out, thinking outside the box and standing up for everybody.
Wow. So thank you for standing in the gap for women and being in and working yourself into a role that you can make such a huge difference, not only for women, but minorities and for anyone who's interested in that field. I have really, really enjoyed this conversation and learned a lot too. I mean, you threw around some terms that I'm like, okay, I have learned so much here. But anything you want to leave us with? We have about a minute left. Anything you want to leave us with? And we want to thank everybody for joining us on today. Next week, we will be joined by Sharice Davids, Congresswoman Sharice Davids, who's going to come on and speak with Robin Sanders. But give us your closing remarks, Elise.
So a couple things. First, I apologize. I talk fast.
That's
I talk
okay.
faster when I'm nervous, and I'm not nervous. And second, I was scared because the first thing before you guys all came on, Janice said, "I hope we can fill an hour," and I'm like, I hope so too. But I think I just started spatting, so I'm like, look down. I'm like, wow. But I really have enjoyed it. I really appreciate all that you guys do. I think you guys have done a great job with getting this started last month. I think it was the start. Sure, Congresswoman Davids is my congresswoman. I get to vote for her every 2 years, and she does a great job. It's just neat, the people that you're bringing on. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Duran, everybody at Swope Health, and everybody that was able to hang on and listen. It was a lot of fun, and it was a great way to have a nice Thursday to spend my lunch day.
Great. Thank you so much. And we look forward. We'll probably have some other conversations with you in the future, but thank you so much for joining us on today. And thank you, Swope and community who have joined us. Have a good day.